The sun had just begun to dip behind the turrets of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. Inside, the royal family moved with the familiar grace that came from centuries of tradition. William and Catherine exchanged quiet smiles as George, Charlotte, and Louis played near the Grand Hall, their laughter echoing faintly through the corridors. Louis, as always, was a bundle of energy. He darted around with a mischievous glint in his eye, reaching for a tray of chocolates, only to be intercepted gently by his mother. Catherine's voice was calm but firm. "Louis, remember your manners." Louis pouted briefly, but then quickly shifted his attention to a visiting guest, an internationally acclaimed pianist whose reputation for precision and discipline preceded him. "Before we move further, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that over 90% of you watch my royal family videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and helps me keep bringing you the latest updates, secrets, and shocking moments from the world of royalty. And while you're here, I want to hear from you. What do you think about this royal story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and can't wait to see how you react to these unbelievable royal moments. The pianist had come to perform a private recital for the family, a rare opportunity, and the castle staff moved like clockwork to ensure everything was perfect. Louis, ever curious, peeked over the edge of the grand piano, his small fingers tracing the polished wood. He had never been formally trained, but there was an instinctive fascination in him, an eagerness that clashed with his usual impish antics. The pianist noticed the small observer immediately. He was a man of exacting standards, and children often seemed like interruptions to his artistry. He looked down at Louis, his expression a mixture of bemusement and mild judgment. "Can you play?" he asked, not unkindly but with the weight of expectation. Louis shook his head quickly, retreating slightly. "Not really," he murmured, cheeks tinged with embarrassment. William and Catherine exchanged glances, sensing the subtle tension. The pianist smiled faintly, leaning closer. "Perhaps one day," he said, his tone almost teasing, yet carrying an undeniable authority. Louis felt a prick of shame. The hall seemed suddenly larger, the ceilings higher, and the audience of shadows, family, servants, staff, more intimidating. In that moment, he was acutely aware of being observed, of being measured against standards he didn't yet understand. He glanced at his siblings, who were absorbed in their own play, seemingly untouched by the scrutiny that weighed upon him. For Louis, the encounter planted a seed, a realization that the world sometimes underestimated children, assuming innocence equated to incapability. That notion stung not because of pride, but because it brushed against his quiet desire to be seen, truly seen, for more than laughter or mischief. After the recital, as the pianist departed, Louis lingered near the piano. He pressed a single key softly, listening to the tone reverberate through the hall. It was a small, almost imperceptible note, yet it held a resonance that lingered in his chest. Alone, he allowed himself a private moment of reflection. The words of the pianist, the subtle judgment, the laughter of his siblings, all merged into a quiet awareness. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the difference between external perception and internal capability. That evening, Louis lay awake in his room, the castle quiet around him. The golden hues of sunset had faded to soft moonlight, streaming through the tall windows. He thought about the piano, about music, about the way a single note could express what words could not. And he thought about the future, how one day, perhaps, he would show the world that he could be more than they assumed, that talent and determination could exist quietly, nurtured in solitude, away from the gaze of expectation. In the days that followed, Louis began to observe more keenly, his curiosity sharpened. He watched his father at work, noting the discipline required in public life, the balance between duty and personal expression. He noticed his mother's empathy, her ability to perceive emotion where others only saw surface behavior. And he noticed himself, small and underestimated, yet determined in ways he did not yet articulate. The encounter with the pianist became a reference point, a benchmark against which he measured his own aspirations. Each glance at the grand piano, each fleeting thought of melody became a quiet challenge. One day he would play, and he would be heard, not as a child, not as a curiosity, but as someone whose skill and heart demanded recognition. The castle, once merely a playground, became a landscape of possibility. Every shadow held potential, every quiet corridor whispered of practice and persistence. And within Louis, a determination began to grow, subtle but resolute. A determination that would shape the path of the days to come, bridging the gap between playful innocence and emergent mastery, between fleeting judgment and enduring achievement. The morning sun poured through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, brushing the polished floors with gold. While George and Charlotte attended lessons, Louis quietly slipped away. The corridors were familiar but never boring. Each turn held a whisper of history, a painting of ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow every move. Today he wasn't simply exploring. Today he had a purpose. He moved toward a seldom-used wing of the castle, one that staff passed quickly without thought. Here, tucked behind heavy velvet curtains and forgotten furniture, sat an upright piano, its wood dulled with age, keys slightly chipped, but alive in its imperfection. Louis had discovered it weeks earlier, hidden and ignored, much like himself in the eyes of the world. He approached it cautiously, as if the piano itself were a living being that demanded respect. His small hands hovered over the keys, and for a moment he let silence stretch, listening to the faint creaks of the old castle, the soft sigh of the wind brushing through stone arches. Then he pressed a single note, tentative at first but confident enough to break the quiet. It was a simple sound, yet it felt monumental, a private acknowledgement that he was no longer merely an observer in his own life. Each day, Louis returned to this hidden corner. He taught himself not just the melodies, but the discipline of practice. Slowly, he began to understand rhythm, tone, and the subtle emotion behind each note. Every misstep was a lesson, every hesitation a challenge. In the evenings, he would cross the palace library, drawn toward a leather-bound collection of sheet music that had belonged to Princess Diana. Its pages were soft from decades of touch, annotated in faint pencil marks, her delicate instructions for phrasing and tempo lingering like echoes. Louis traced the handwriting carefully, feeling an invisible bridge across time. He imagined Diana performing these pieces, poised and fearless, her fingers commanding melodies that could move audiences across continents. The thought filled him with both reverence and resolve. Music, he realized, was more than sound. It was a language, a connection between hearts, a legacy. Here, in these quiet hours, he felt linked not only to the piano, but to the courage and artistry of his grandmother, a woman who had endured scrutiny yet remained luminous in talent and spirit. Weeks passed and Louis' skill grew. His fingers moved with increasing assurance, navigating the worn keys as if they were extensions of his own intent. Mistakes no longer frustrated him. They were signposts guiding him toward precision. He learned patience, a new kind of focus that balanced curiosity with control. The playful energy the public adored still existed, but now it had an undercurrent of quiet purpose. No one outside his private practice space knew of the hours he invested, the determination pressing within him like a secret drumbeat. Each note he played was a statement to himself. Capability cannot be measured by age, curiosity can evolve into mastery, and perception can be reshaped by persistence. Catherine noticed subtle changes in her youngest son. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the windows, she observed him sitting near the fireplace, sheet music spread before him, eyes intent and brows furrowed in concentration. There was a calm in him she hadn't seen before, a seriousness that seemed to temper his usual exuberance. William remarked quietly later, "He's different lately, isn't he?" Catherine nodded. They did not intrude. They understood instinctively that this was Louis' domain, a private world where he forged strength unseen by cameras and crowd. What mattered was not performance for others, but mastery for himself. The piano had become a sanctuary, a vessel through which he could channel ambition and curiosity without interruption, without judgment. Louis often recalled the pianist from the Windsor afternoon, the man's faintly mocking words echoing in his mind. "Children are better suited to waving than playing." Instead of discouraging him, those words became a quiet challenge. They pressed him to prove something first to himself, before the world had the chance to define him. Each practice session became deliberate, a negotiation between youthful instinct and emerging skill. He discovered that listening was as important as playing. He learned to read not just the notes, but the spaces between them, to anticipate pauses, to respect silence as much as sound. In solitude, he developed a sensitivity and control that belied his years. One evening, Louis paused in practice, hand hovering above the keys. He could almost hear Diana's voice, gentle yet firm, guiding him through the subtle crescendos and the lingering diminuendos. A profound understanding blossomed within him. Music was a legacy, but it was also his own, waiting to be claimed. Determination became tangible, coalescing into a quiet resolve that no public gaze, no casual remark could shake. Louis understood that this journey was not about applause or recognition. It was about integrity of effort, about proving to himself that he could rise to the challenge that had once made him feel small. And as he pressed the keys again, the notes forming patterns he had learned and honed in solitude, he knew that he was ready. Not for the world, not yet, but for the moment when talent and preparation would intersect, and no one could dismiss him again. Louis was no longer just the playful prince. He was a young artist, a bearer of legacy, and a child discovering the extraordinary within ordinary moments, prepared to turn quiet determination into unforgettable mastery. The evening air of London carried a crispness that seemed to signal importance as the royal family arrived at the Royal Albert Hall. Its red brick facade rose like a crown over the city, the glass dome reflecting fatting sunlight and streetlights in equal measure. Louis sat quietly between his parents in the car, fingers lightly tapping the edge of his seat, a rhythm born of anticipation rather than nerves. Inside, the hall buzzed with subtle energy, musicians tuning instruments, patrons murmuring introductions, and critics scanning programs with practiced eyes. Every detail seemed choreographed, polished, yet beneath the surface, a current of expectation threaded through the crowd. This was no ordinary evening. It was the International Harmony Gala, a gathering of the world's most influential figures in music, education, and performance. Every note mattered. Every glance carried weight. Every misstep could become legend. Upon entering the hall, Louis, small hand, found his mother. Catherine's gaze was calm, but her awareness was sharp. She remembered Windsor, remembered the subtle cruelty veiled as humor, and she knew the tension that accompanied rooms like this. William's presence beside her offered quiet reassurance, though his eyes, too, flicked toward Louis with concern and pride intertwined. They walked to their seats, the polished floors reflecting the golden light of chandeliers, the intricate arches casting soft shadows across faces brimming with anticipation. Louis observed, absorbing every detail, the careful posture of musicians, the hushed murmurs of patrons, the polished sheen of the piano waiting on stage. It was enormous, commanding attention without effort. The air smelled faintly of varnish, perfume, and the weight of tradition. And at the center of it all, standing with his usual composed authority, was the pianist from Windsor. His sharp eyes scanned the room, noticing Louis almost subconsciously. He recalled the boy's small frame, the moment at Windsor when embarrassment had pressed upon him like a stone. A faint smirk had followed that memory. He assumed nothing had changed. As the gala commenced, Louis sat quietly, hands folded, eyes attentive. The hall filled with music that was elegant, precise, and exacting, each performance met with restrained applause. Musicians played with confidence, yet the room demanded more than technical skill. It demanded emotion, presence, resonance. When the pianist took the stage, a ripple of polite applause followed him. Every gesture was deliberate, every motion rehearsed. He adjusted the bench, rolled his shoulders, and placed his hands on the keys, preparing to convey mastery to an audience that expected nothing less. The opening notes were familiar and clean, yet a subtle hesitation crept in, unnoticed by most but perceptible to those attuned. The pianist's control wavered imperceptibly, his flow slightly disrupted, his confident posture faltering in the smallest ways. Louis noticed immediately, not in judgment but in recognition. Something shifted within him. The air that had seemed untouchable now held possibility, the imperfection revealing an opening, a moment where he could step forward. The pianist continued, unaware of the small presence observing him so keenly. His mind ran through scales and measures, anticipating applause rather than considering subtle shifts in emotion. Yet to Louis, music was more than performance. It was feeling, understanding, responding. He leaned slightly forward, fingers flexing in rhythm with the unseen pulse, eyes following the movement of sound as it traveled across the hall. The audience felt the tension too, a slight unease threaded beneath the surface of decorum, as if the air itself held its breath. And then, as if guided by instinct rather than command, Louis rose from his seat. He walked toward the stage, each step measured, calm, deliberate. Eyes tracked him, royal yet unexpected in motion, until he reached the piano. The pianist, now aware of Louis, raised a brow, assuming trepidation, hesitation, or a minor disruption. But he was wrong. Louis placed his hands above the keys, listening, adjusting, connecting. The first note was quiet yet confident, deliberate yet fluid. Each subsequent note followed with intention, crafting a melody that spoke not of age but of understanding. He let each sound resonate, allowed pauses to breathe, and framed the sequence with subtle, natural phrasing. Silence became part of the performance, tension a companion rather than an obstacle. The pianist felt it immediately, a shift in expectation, a quiet authority emanating from the smallest figure on stage. He realized this was no casual touch, no childish imitation. This was insight, sensitivity, control. The boy was attuned to rhythm, nuance, and the invisible currents of music that separated mediocrity from artistry. The hall grew still, the usual murmurs replaced by awestruck attention. Patrons leaned forward, heads tilted, absorbing not spectacle but mastery. Louis continued, hands flowing, small but confident, expressing more than melody, expressing presence, maturity, and determination distilled into music. The pianist's initial assumption crumbled. This child was not merely a prince to be guided or indulged. He was a musician, capable of commanding attention through intent, emotion, and skill. As the final note faded, Louis held his hands above the keys, allowing silence to settle before lowering them gracefully. A bow followed, slow, deliberate, dignified, and only then did the room release, applause swelling with surprise, respect, and admiration. Louis, parents rose, eyes glistening, pride tempered by humility. The pianist approached quietly afterward, his expression measured but sincere. "I misjudged you," he admitted softly, words meant only for Louis, acknowledging both talent and the resilience that had driven him. Louis' small smile was quiet, calm, and certain, a reflection of weeks of hidden practice, of private connection to a legacy that had shaped him, of determination finally realized in public. That evening, the International Harmony Gala became more than an event. It became a testament. Preparation and perseverance, when combined with heart, could silence doubt and reshape perception. Louis returned to his seat, still a child in appearance, yet immeasurably changed. The applause echoed not just in the hall, but in the chambers of history, marking a moment when a young prince claimed his voice, leaving everyone, especially the pianist, stunned. The echo of applause still lingered in the Royal Albert Hall long after Louis had returned to his seat. The warmth of it was not just for the notes that had filled the room, but for the audacity, the courage, and the unexpected mastery that a boy no older than 12 had demonstrated. Louis, hands rested in his lap now, small and calm, but inside, a fire that had been quietly nurtured in the solitude of secret practices blazed with quiet certainty. Around him, the murmurs of patrons and dignitaries shifted into discussion, admiration threaded through every word. "Remarkable," whispered one. "Extraordinary," agreed another. And somewhere beneath the polished decorum of the gala, a musician who had doubted him now studied Louis with a mixture of awe and humility. As the evening progressed, the recognition extended beyond polite admiration. Invitations for private performances arrived, discreetly at first under the guise of protocol but unmistakable in intent. Louis' parents exchanged quiet glances, pride tempered by awareness. William and Catherine had always known their son was special, but this public acknowledgement of both talent and determination transcended expectation. He had not merely played music, he had commanded it, channeled it, and transformed an audience's perception in minutes. Each note had carried more than sound. It carried discipline, inheritance, and the invisible echo of Princess Diana's compassion for the arts and her belief in nurturing potential. Louis teachers, once cautious in their praise, found themselves drafting letters of recognition, formal endorsements of skill, and meticulous evaluations of progress. "His determination is unparalleled," wrote the head of the conservatory. "His sensitivity to musical nuance suggests not merely talent, but instinctual understanding." Every word reinforced the same truth. This boy had harnessed private discipline into public triumph. His legacy, though only beginning, was already shaping perceptions. Reporters, who initially hovered near the fringes of royal curiosity, now captured images and words carefully, recognizing the significance of the moment. Headlines would describe him as the young prodigy of Windsor, and a royal talent emerges, framing a narrative that Louis had earned through effort, focus, and the quiet intensity that had defined his practice for months. But the recognition was not the only impact. Louis himself felt a shift that could not be captured in applause or accolades. He understood profoundly that mastery was not about public validation, but about consistent commitment, even when unseen. The hours spent in the attic at Windsor, practicing scales, studying music sheets, and listening to recordings in the quiet, had culminated in this moment. Each minute of solitude, each repetition of a complex passage, each careful adjustment of posture and phrasing had converged into a performance that resonated far beyond the hall. And yet, he felt no triumph in arrogance. There was humility in accomplishment, a recognition that the pursuit of excellence was endless, and that this was but a step in a journey defined by curiosity, effort, and respect for the art itself. In the days that followed, invitations continued to arrive, but Louis' focus did not waver. He resumed his private practice with renewed determination, exploring compositions of greater complexity, experimenting with interpretations, and learning to balance emotion with precision. The legacy of Princess Diana, whose patronage and love for the arts had inspired generations, became a silent companion in these sessions. Her ethos of empathy, compassion, and encouragement echoed in his choices. Each note played not merely for acclaim, but for the integrity of expression, the purity of sound, and the resonance of feeling. Even in solitude, Louis felt connected to something larger than himself, an inheritance not of privilege, but of purpose. As recognition solidified around him, Louis began to understand that influence was not granted by birthright alone, nor by fleeting applause. Influence required discipline, vision, and the courage to act when opportunity presented itself. The International Harmony Gala had provided a platform, but it was his preparation, his diligence, and his steadfast refusal to allow insecurity to dictate action that had defined the outcome. His parents, watching with pride tempered by understanding of responsibility, knew that this was a turning point. William and Catherine spoke little of fame or expectation. Instead, they reinforced the values that had nurtured Louis: growth, patience, dedication, humility, and the courage to pursue mastery. Ultimately, Louis' emergence at the gala became more than a story of talent revealed. It became an example of perseverance, resilience, and the quiet power of determination. Patrons, musicians, and observers who had once underestimated him now recognized the depth of preparation and the subtleties of discipline required to achieve such performance. In letters, recordings, and private discussions, the narrative of the young prince shifted from curiosity to admiration. His example inspired peers, encouraged educators to nurture potential, and reminded the world that even in privilege, greatness is earned through effort, focus, and intentionality. And so, the young Louis returned to his daily routines, changed yet grounded, recognized yet humble. The applause of the International Harmony Gala faded into memory, but its lesson endured. Mastery is not merely an outcome of talent. It is the product of dedication, intentional practice, and the courage to step forward when opportunity arises. From that evening onward, Louis' life would continue to intersect with music, public expectation, and personal growth, each note a testament to the determination that had transformed potential into achievement. In the quiet of his practice room, fingers poised above the keys, Louis understood that this was only the beginning. And with that understanding, he smiled, ready for whatever melody life would demand next.